The night I climbed out my own bedroom window, I cut my hand on the frame. I didn't feel it until the next morning. What I felt in the moment was the man standing in my hallway, between me and every door in my house. Let me back up. I'm Cole, 31. I run swing shift at a distribution center off the bypass here in Fort Wayne, so I get home when the street is already dead. 1 in the morning, sometimes later. You learn the sound of your own house at that hour, the furnace, the fridge, the way the floor gives in the kitchen. You learn it well enough that when one thing is wrong, your body knows before your head does. That night, the first wrong thing was small. My phone charger lived on the little table by the front door, and it was on the floor across the room, cord stretched out like something had dragged it. I stood there with my keys still in my hand and told myself the cat, except I don't have a cat. Then I heard the bathroom fan. Running, I never leave it on. And then I saw the footprint, right there in the hallway on the wood, wet, longer than my shoe. It had not rained on me. My shoes were dry. Somebody had come in with wet feet and walked down my hallway, and I was still standing by the front door with it open behind me. Here is what got me. I checked the back door. The deadbolt was thrown, locked from the inside. I had come in the front and the back was locked from the inside, which meant whoever threw that bolt was on my side of it, in the house, with me, with the door I had just opened as the only way out. I want to tell you I did something smart. I didn't. I froze in my kitchen and I listened, and under the fan I heard it. Weight. A slow shift of weight on the floor, the same give I knew from 1,000 nights, except I was not the one making it. And then I looked at the knife block on my counter. Wood, 6 slots. One of them was empty. The big one. I keep the big one in the second slot and it was gone. So I stood there and put that together. A man was somewhere in my house, and on his way through it he had stopped in my kitchen and taken the one thing in there that could open a person up. I stepped into the living room to get an angle on the hall, and that is when I saw him. Not straight on, in the TV. My TV was off black and a dead screen throws back the whole room like a bad mirror. In it at the end of the hallway there was a shape, a man, standing perfectly still where the hall turns toward the bedrooms. Not moving, just standing in the dark in my house facing the room I was in. I have tried to describe how that felt and I can't. The closest I get is that the floor sort of dropped out. He was between me and the front door and he knew it. He was not rushing. That was the worst part, honestly. He had all the time in the world and he knew that he did. I did the only thing my body would let me do, which was put a door between us. I backed into my bedroom and I turned that little lock on the knob, the useless kind you can pop with a butter knife, and I held it with both hands. And then the knob turned. Slow testing. Left then right, this quiet pressure like he was being polite about it. No banging, no shouting. Just a man on the other side of a hollow door trying the handle the way you try a door you expect to open. My window was painted half shut and I tore it the rest of the way up and went out head first into the side yard. That is where the frame opened my hand. I ran 2 houses down to a guy named Ruiz from Pickup Ball at the Y, who I barely knew. I stood on his porch bleeding, calling 911, watching my own front door the whole time. The man was gone before the cruisers came. Out the back they figured the bolt he had thrown to buy himself the quiet. They found a few things that were not mine, a gym bag, a phone that would not turn on, a balled-up pair of socks, still damp, which is a thing I did not let myself think about too long, and on the sill of the kitchen window behind the sink, the one window I never think about, fresh prime marks and a smear of dirt on the paint. That was how he had come in, they told me. And by the wear on the latch, it was not the first time he had done it. The report went into a file somewhere. Nobody was ever arrested. What stays with me is not the chase. It is that he knew where my hallway turned. He knew about the back door before I checked it. He stood in the one spot in my whole house where a dead TV would hand me his reflection, and even then he had me cut off from the door. That is not luck. That is a man who watched my windows long enough to learn my shift, my street, the layout of my rooms, and then walked back out into a city that never gave him a name. I don't check whether I locked up anymore. A lock was never what failed me. When I get home now, before I touch a light, I stand just inside the door in the dark and I don't move until the house proves to me it is empty. Most nights it does that fast, but I lost the thing I used to have without trying. The certainty that the man who knew my house is not standing at the end of the hall, waiting for me to walk in the way I always did.
So somebody was coming into my house while I was at work, and for a couple of weeks, I honestly thought I was the one losing it. I could not tell you now which day it actually started. The first thing that tipped me off was the trash. The bin by my back door got taken out to the alley on a Thursday, and I had not touched it in a week. I stood there looking at an empty can and a fresh bag already snapped into it, and I thought, when did I do that? By the way, I'm Whitney, 31. Vet tech, 12-hour shifts, so my house sits empty in the middle of the day, every day, like a held breath. Most nights, I'd grab something from the Browns by the clinic and eat it in the car in my own driveway, too wiped to go in and cook. Here in Wichita, they test the tornado sirens the first Monday of the month. I remember standing in my kitchen once while one wound up outside, and thinking the wrongness in my house had that same shape, something scheduled, something that had been running on a rhythm I only just noticed. Because it was not only the trash. There was a glass in my dish rack, clean, upside down, and I had not used a glass like that in days. The thermostat would be 2 degrees off from where I set it. And one evening I came home to a smell in my spare room, faint, a cigarette, a brand I did not know, in a house where nobody smokes. I did what you do. I explained it. I told myself I was tired. 12-hour shifts will hollow you out, and it is easier to believe you are forgetful than to believe the other thing. Then the other thing got harder to argue with. My cat's bowl was full one morning when I knew I had meant to fill it and hadn't. Somebody had fed my cat. And the back door, which I leave unlocked half the time because I lose keys, was locked when I got home. Deadbolt and all. On a day I could have sworn the door was open when I walked out. That was the part that turned my stomach, and I want to be clear about why. It was not that someone was taking things. Nothing was gone. Somebody was tidying. Somebody was putting my house in order and locking it up, and order that is not yours in your own home is so much worse than a mess. A burglar you can understand. A burglar wants out. This person wanted to stay comfortable. And then a small thing landed that I could not explain away at all. My neighbor across the street, an older woman who misses nothing, told me one evening that it was nice I had started coming home for lunch. I had not been home for lunch in a year. Somebody had been coming and going in the middle of the day, in the open, in the daylight, and to the street it looked enough like me that nobody thought twice about it. So I bought a little camera, the cheap kind, $40. I set it on top of the cabinet, pointed at the kitchen and the back door. I told nobody and I went to work. It was 2 nights before it caught anything. I was in bed scrolling the feed on my phone, half asleep, and the motion alert went off and I opened it. A man came in through my back door, with a key. He did not force anything. He turned a key in my lock, stepped inside, and then he bent down and took his shoes off. Set them by the door, neat. And he walked through my kitchen in his socks, slow, easy, like a man walking through his own house at the end of a long day. He opened my refrigerator, stood in the light of it, closed it. And when he left, a few minutes later, he pulled the back door shut behind him and I watched the deadbolt turn from the outside. He locked up. He locked my house on his way out, the way you would for someone you were looking after. I watched it 4 times. The 4th time I caught the part I had missed. On his way to the door, he stopped at the little shelf where I keep a framed picture of my mom, and he straightened it. Turned it a couple of degrees, square to the edge, the way you fix a thing in a room you spend a lot of time in and want to look right. I did not sleep. In the morning, I took the footage to the police, and that is where it stopped being a stranger, because when they slowed it down, I knew him. Not well, but I knew the face. He was the guy from the property side, the one who had done the walkthrough the day I signed the lease, who had the keys to half the rentals on my block. He had held a copy of my key, the one from the tenant before me. He never turned it in. And by his own account, when they picked him up, He had been keeping an eye on the place between renters for years. He just never stopped once I was the one living there. He did not think of it as breaking in. In his head, he still had a key, so it was still a little bit his. He had an explanation for everything and a key that made half of it technically true, and he walked out of that station the same day. I changed my locks that afternoon. But here is what a new lock does not fix. I never found out how many copies of the old key were ever cut. He had one. The tenant before me had one. Somebody made those somewhere, and there is no list. The lock on my door is new. My key, the one I thought only opened my own front door, was never the only one that ever did. And it is out there right now, in a drawer or a pocket, still shaped exactly like the way into a house I no longer live in.
My dog stopped going down to the basement about 3 weeks before I found out why. He was not a nervous dog. I mean, that is the thing I need you to understand up front because later it mattered. He was a big, dumb, friendly shepherd mix who would walk up to a thunderstorm and wag at it. And 1 week in the spring he just stopped, would not take the basement stairs, stood at the top with his ears back, staring down into the dark, and if I carried him down he would shake until I brought him up. I had rented the place maybe 5 months. It is field service work, so I am gone 10, 11 hours a day. The house was older, out past the edge of Roanoke, the kind with a basement that somebody half-finished in some decade nobody remembers and then gave up on. Paneling on 2 walls, bare block on the others. A workbench along the back with shelving built over it, heavy, the kind that looks like it came with the house. The dog was the first sign. The second was the floor. There was a spot in my kitchen, one corner near the register, that was warm, not warm like sun, warm like something under it was giving off heat. I put my bare foot on it one morning and it was like standing over a person. I told myself old house, old ducks. I started keeping my coffee on the other counter so I would stop noticing it. Then the small stuff started stacking up. My hot water would go cold early, like I had already taken a shower I had not taken. A work hoodie of mine went into the dryer and never came out, and I tore the laundry room apart and blamed myself. The power bill jumped in a month. I had been out of town for 8 days, and the dog stopped eating, which for that dog was like the sun not coming up. One more thing before the night had ended. The bare bulb at the bottom of the basement stairs kept dying on me. I kept screwing new ones in, and twice I found it not blown but backed out of the socket, a half-turn, hand-loose, dark. I told myself the old house shook it free. It was not the house. He did not want a light hanging over the one path he had to walk. The night it broke open, I came home late, and there was a smell coming out of that warm register in the kitchen. A person smell. Sweat and cigarette and something sour, drifting up out of a vent that should have been pushing nothing but cold air from an empty basement. I got a flashlight. The dog would not come, planted himself in the kitchen doorway and watched me go down alone. Honestly, I have thought 100 times since about how he knew and I didn't. Behind that heavy shelving over the workbench, the whole unit swung. It was not attached to anything. It was a door somebody had made it into, and behind it there was a room I did not know my house had. Small. Cold storage, an old canning cellar maybe, cut back into the foundation, and it was lived in. There was a camping mattress on the floor, a battery lantern, a jug. In the dust between the mattress and the wall there was a path worn smooth and shining, walked so many times the concrete had gone pale. And my things, my hoodie folded, a bowl and a spoon from my own kitchen, a flashlight I had written off as lost. Somebody had been carrying my things down through the wall one at a time and building a little home out of them, right under the room where I slept. And the mattress was pushed up under the cold air return, the big one that ties into the ducts for the whole house. I know now why. I got down where it was and I could hear my kitchen, my stairs, the creak of my bedroom floor, clear as anything, right over my head. He had not put his bed there to sleep warm. He had put it there to listen. He had known when my truck left in the morning because he could hear the door. He had run the hot water in the hours he had learned I was gone. I did not hear him come back. There is an old coal chute on the outside of that house. A metal hatch I had looked at once and figured was rusted shut for good, and it was not. It opened from the inside. I had my back to it, the light in my hand, looking at my own folded hoodie. And then the cold air changed behind me, and then he was on me in the dark. I do not remember all of it. I remember going down, my head off the block wall, a warmth on my scalp that I knew was blood. I remember getting a hand on the shelving and pulling the whole thing over between us. I got up those stairs on all fours. I got the door at the top shut. I put my back against it and called 911 from the kitchen floor next to my dog. They found the room. They found enough in it to know he had been there a long time, longer than my 5 months, long before I ever turned a key in that door. A case got opened. That is all I will say about that part, because that part is not the part that kept me up. I moved out that week, broke the lease, ate the deposit gone, and I have moved twice more since, and I sleep fine in places that never had a basement. But the address I cannot move out of is the math. 5 months, 10 hours a day most days. All those evenings I thought I was decompressing alone in a quiet house, and the quiet was a man under my floor holding still so I would stay easy. I keep trying to count the nights, and I keep not finishing, because every version of the number is a version where I was never once, in that whole house, actually by myself.